And welcome everybody to the Daily Space Weather. I'm your muted host, smAsho, aka Dan. We're starting things out looking at the sun in 171 angstroms. It's a 48-hour movie from the SDO. A bunch of filaments associated with that active region in the northeast. And if I sound a little bit muted, it's because you just can't be too careful, can you? You better stay home, folks. You better wear a mask, folks, because it's so scary and spooky out there. Oh my gosh! By the way, we are streaming live. It's twitch.tv/smAsho. If you haven't checked us out over there, you're probably not seeing live streams. Next, we're looking at helioviewer.org. And I'm going to get real reckless in a minute, and I'm going to start touching my face.
Ah, that's much better. Let's take a look at the magnetic fields. And we don't see any sunspots. They could suddenly form while we're making the video, though, so we'll keep you posted. There's the 304 angstroms view, and we've got custom movies for that. Here's the SDO 48-hour movie in 304 angstroms. And again, you can see pretty wild filamentary activity up there at a great distance beyond where that active region is. Serious filamentary activity. I'll let that play through a second time before we zoom in. And here's a close-up of that southern active region. Again, I don't think there are any sunspots, but you never know. The magnetic environment can change with zero warning. So we'll be looking at it again in a minute, toward the end of the video. Lots of stuff to talk about, including xylitol, what's inside stars, and what's certainly not inside stars. And there's a good close-up there of that northern active region and some of that filamentary plasma. And 304 angstroms is ionized helium spectra, if you weren't aware, folks. Thanks to all of our new viewers, supporters, etc. Next, looking at the KP index, which is a sort of a global average of geomagnetism, down at KP of 1. No surprises there. 10.7 centimeter radial flux remains at 70 solar flux units. Here's where stuff is in the solar system. There's where it'll be in a week. Here's a star chart. And again, if you're up before sunrise, you might be able to see Comet Swan. You might also be able to see Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars, and eventually the Moon. Now, we haven't seen any significant X-ray flares, and since those sunspots seem to have evaporated in what some call the Earth-facing quiet effect, which, whether that's an effect or a coincidence, nobody really knows. But in any case, there are the X-ray flux, and I'll have to retract my forecast of C-class flares coming out of those active regions, because again, they never coalesced into sunspots, at least not while Earth-facing. So we'll see if they evolve back into sunspots again, or if they evaporate and just sort of fizzle out. Proton flux is flatline, no surprise there. As we're just coming off of solar minimum, not that many protons flying. So the real-time solar wind is showing us a pretty strong BTBZ here. We see that BT is all the way up to 6, and that's 6 nanotesla. And the BZ, which is the association with one of the polar fields, is in the southern at -3. So -3 and 6 are the BZ, BT respectively. Phi angle is in a current state of shifting here, it looks like. Current phi angle around 300 degrees. And we've seen the solar wind density drop off here a tiny bit over the past 12 hours. And a small increase in the solar wind speed, an indication that it's probably a coronal hole wind stream. And a pretty weak diffuse one in that. Next, we'll take a look at some cosmology topics. So there's some interesting stories always coming out in cosmology, folks. And we're very interested to see the entire field rewritten with real information. So the first thing we'll look at is cosmic rays, as cosmic rays are an aspect of cosmology. And there are various sites all around the world that are measuring cosmic rays. Here's the data from the Opacity Neutron Monitor. Middle pane here, this is the 30-day chart. Here's Barentsburg. And they're both pretty flat on the month. Tiny uptick at Opacity, actually. Next, we'll look at Athens, Greece. And again, we are streaming live, folks, so please bear with me. Here's the Athens Neutron Monitor. Pretty flat over the past 30 days there. Mexico City's next. It's in alphabetical order, folks. It's basically arbitrary based on the alphabet. Flat at Mexico City. Let's see if Moscow's sending data yet. And they've totally changed around what they're doing here. And since I can't read Russian, I have no idea what that says. And next, Oulu, Finland. And DOMC, Antarctica. There's Oulu. Slight upward trend there in the past 30 days. Here's DOMC, Antarctica. Tiny upward trend there over the past 30 days also. So don't take our word for it. Monitor cosmic rays yourself. Do your own research. And don't believe the hype when people tell you things that aren't true on the internet. Let's talk about protoplanets and the search for exoplanets. The search for exoplanets. Why don't I cover it? Well, the reason I don't cover it very much is because I'm not interested in it. Exoplanets are interesting. However, I'm much more concerned about understanding the sun than I am distant planets. Now, this is an interesting one here, as you see these two empty spaces around this area, planet B. That looks a lot like a plasmasphere, and this is probably where the Z fields are coming out of these objects. Those are probably the polar fields of the planet, which have sort of cleared out everything. But if you look at this one, you see these long filamentary strings. Those look like they're coming out of planet C, and that they're all bent up, possibly by the solar wind, or the stellar wind, I should say, because that's not the sun. That's PDS 70 and protoplanets B and C. So anyway, I don't want to really spend a lot of time talking about exoplanets and so on, but astronomers believe that they've seen the birth of a pair of exoplanets. And while it is interesting, not nearly as interesting as understanding the way the sun works. So let's talk about the way the sun doesn't work. Like this. That is not what the sun is doing. And this goes deep, deep into the heart of astronomy. Now, when you take an astronomy class, you'll learn that stars produce the heavy elements in their cores. And the elements that are heavier than helium, those are produced by generation 2 stars, and they have to coalesce from supernoval accretion disks, and that a nuclear fusion dynamo is what creates the light spectra of a star, which is the basis for the HR diagram, as we base what astronomers base the life cycle of a star on is its color spectra, its size and brightness. And without getting too in-depth into what I think is really going on there, let's just talk about the spectra. So there are dozens of reasons to not believe that there is a nuclear fusion dynamo inside of a star, or that a star is primarily composed of plasma. The plasma is just on the surface, and without condensed matter, there's no way to produce a continuous light spectra. So this is part of the reasoning of why the sun emits a continuous white light spectra. You need a vibrational lattice for that. You cannot produce that with gas. So this is part of the reason why stars are not electric, and this is part of the reason why stars do not have a nuclear fusion dynamo inside of them, and why they're not composed entirely of a gaseous plasma. A gaseous plasma cannot emit a continuous white light spectra. Let's move on. About this Zero Hedge article about how the sun has, quote, gone into lockdown. Now, there are a lot of factors in determining solar activity. Going back to historic times of Galileo and before, people were counting sunspots. Sunspots are one of the proxies for solar activity. However, the sun does a whole lot of things besides produce sunspots. Now, as we've shown repeatedly on the channel, we can get coronal mass ejections without any sunspots and without any Earth-based detectable solar flares. And while the solar activity does drive the Earth's climate, the current solar minimum is not as deep as the last solar minimum between cycle 23 and cycle 24. There are all kinds of data that back up what I've just said, whether it's cosmic ray flux being at a lower level now than it was then, or if it's the Earth's thermosphere being warmer than it was then. That's all a good thing. However, Earth's temperature lags solar activity by 2 to 3 years. So while there already are all kinds of food problems associated with too much snow in the northern hemisphere for 3 winters in a row, we're expecting the planet to get a little bit colder over the next 2 years. So that stuff could all be exacerbated. Approximately 1/4 of the world's pigs have already been wiped out by African swine fever, but we don't want people to misunderstand the physics behind what's going on here. Earth's climate is controlled by the latency of heat in water in the oceans. And since it takes a long time for water to heat up and cool down, that is why Earth's climate lags solar activity by years. Now, if something like a volcano kicks up, that completely changes the game. It could get much colder very suddenly. So if you see something like the Thames freeze, well, it might be time to build a bunker. But in any case, here's the thermosphere index. So here's another piece of data showing that the last solar minimum was deeper than the current solar minimum. And this is why I don't say the word grand solar minimum 800 times per second in my videos, because it's only grand if it turns out to be grand. The main factor in figuring out what the sun's activity is doing is none of these factors. It's solar polar field strength. So if you head to solon.info/solar, there's the URL for the solar polar fields. This was just updated yesterday, so we thank you very much, solon.info. One thing to note is that the North Polar Field has leveled off just in the past couple of months here, while the South Solar Polar Field continues to rise. This black line here is the solar polar field average, and the spread between these fields is really the most important determining factor. So if you notice, the spread between here and here is already larger than the spread between here and here. So here's the last solar cycle. And anyway, solar polar fields are the real determining factor of solar activity, and we're not exactly sure how the solar polar fields do what they do, and I've got some interesting theories about it, which I'll have to save for a later video, like a cosmology video. In the meantime, let's get back to data and look at the magnetosphere. So here's the Space Weather Modeling Framework model by University of Michigan. And it's showing a pretty steady magnetosphere there, and we're looking at the pressure. A slight increase there at the end as the solar wind velocity kicks up and the solar wind density drops down. Nothing too exciting or extraordinary happening there. Let's look at geospace ground magnetic perturbations yet, as we do most days. Here's 4 hours of data from that also. And we see evidence of the South Pole down here in the southern Indian Ocean. We've got 2 North Poles, one over Canada and one over Siberia. Did you know? It's a polar excursion. We're very interested to see what happens next, which is part of the reason why we do the videos in the first place. Also in an attempt to understand and help others understand the physics. So we've seen some very high and very low, a very big range of ghost magnetometer readings, having made it well up over 130 nanotesla, and now all the way back down. So I believe what's happening here is this is the polarity crossing happening just a couple of hours ago. That's the polarity crossing of the heliospheric current sheet. And here is an image of that in terms of top view ecliptic plane field plot. This is all magnetometer data, folks, from the National Sunspot Observatory. It includes 51 ground-based magnetometers and one on stereo A, which, by the way, this is stereo A out here, and this is stereo B out here. And if you're wondering about Lagrange points, you've got this: Lagrange point 1, Lagrange point 2, Lagrange point 3, Lagrange point 4, and Lagrange point 5. If you don't know what Lagrange points are, those are locations where an object will tend to stay in orbit synchronous with the Earth. Line of sight field plot shows a little bit of a pull-up, pull-down of the B field here, and it's associated with that active region in the north. And we're not sure if either of those active regions are more powerful than the other. We'll let you know by the end of the video, again, because the magnetic environment can change at any moment with no warning. And keep in mind, this data is 1 hour and 29 minutes old. The next thing we're going to look at is electron flux. So the greater than 2 mega electron volt flux, very low levels. Here's the GOES electron flux, and this is measured right at the ionosphere layer. Pretty normal here, actually, and I wouldn't be surprised if this stayed well below warning levels throughout the day, again, because there appears to be a coronal hole wind stream increasing the velocity of the solar wind now. And I don't expect that to get very much higher than it'll be, probably only around 400 kilometers a second. And just for you new viewers out there, and perhaps even you old viewers out there who've been with us for years, layers of the atmosphere. So here's where the ionosphere happens, folks. This is where the GOES is measuring the electron flux, the magnetometer, all that sort of stuff. The proton flux, that's all measured right at the ionosphere boundary. And so here's the troposphere. This is where all your weather occurs. Here's a stratosphere. This is the part of the atmosphere we look to see if any volcanic injections have made it to there, as matter in the stratosphere can stay up there for years. So we're hoping we don't get some sort of a volcanic-induced winter, because a year without a summer could cause entire nations to collapse and billions to die. Next, we'll look at the total electron content forecast, and it's quite low levels there, so no real surprise there, as we see very low levels of electron flux. And that's looking through the entire air column in between ground and things like geosynchronous satellites, all the way out to the thermosphere. So very low levels there. Expect not many GPS errors. Next, looking at the F2 ionosphere layer, actually all F layers. And now this is a different thing here, folks. We're looking at vibrational factors here, as this is megahertz. We see some big-time discharges there. When you see those red blobs, that's an F layer. And it's looking a little anomalous once again. And that, as usual, looks associated with the South Atlantic anomaly, which perhaps is more anomalous in Northern Hemisphere spring and summer. Not exactly sure on that one, but we'll keep you posted and we'll keep watching it on the daily. Here's the latest image. That one from 8:15 UT, looking a little more normal by then. Next, we'll look at pressure cells here on windy.com as we try to get the wheels turning by advancing this via the GFS forecast. We'll let that advance about 24 hours into the GFS forecast. Here's where we expect pressure cells to be at 12 noon tomorrow, and that's 12 noon Eastern Daylight Time. I'm located in eastern Pennsylvania in the Lehigh Valley. We won't get into any sort of atmospheric physics lessons today because it's the daily space weather. Next, we're going to look at earthquakes. We're going to note anything odd or anything extreme. Nothing over a 6 magnitude, certainly. And we're just going to scroll up here, cover any deep quakes, cover any weird quakes, shallow quakes that are above sea level, for instance. And here's a deep one at the Northern Mariana Islands. It's 484 kilometers deep and a 4.5 magnitude. So we see a couple 5+, including a 5 magnitude at Greece. Here's a deep one at Alaska. We've seen quite a few deep quakes in southern Alaska. That one's a 4.0 magnitude at 118.6 kilometers depth. China saw a 5.2 magnitude, that is. Here's one occurring exactly at 0 kilometers depth in Nevada, as they see aftershock after aftershock following a 6.5 magnitude rumbler a few days ago. Here's a deep quake in western South America, one of the main spots we see deep quakes in repeatedly for years. And we've got quite a long list here, and Nevada, pardon my mispronunciation, Nevada is all over the list with lots and lots of shaking going on. Next, volcanoes. We go straight from seismicity to volcanism, folks. Mount Aso, flight level 6,000. Sakurajima, flight level 7,000. Semeru, flight level 14,000. So that's an uptick at Semeru, I believe. Yasur back on the list. That's on Vanuatu. And unknown volcanic ash cloud there. Popocatépetl exploding, flight level 20,000 there. And while volcanic ash likely not present at Ravenador, please do not attempt to do a triple Lindy over the caldera. And let's talk about COVID-19, okay? Now everybody knows it's made of China, and everybody's heard us talk about how you need to learn how to pronounce China, okay? China. What you want to do is say it with a D, China, and you want to say it kind of muted, as if you have a sinus infection. China. We're not a fan, China. China. See that, China? For you get. All right. What are you doing on lockdown? Are you locked down? Or are you forced to go out every day like I am? Hey, check it out. Exactly 2 months ago to the day, we made a video called COVID-19, a disease caused by coronavirus, cured via hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. Now, we should have said zinc, but I jumped the gun and put the video out immediately because it was plausible. Guess what? Trump says he's taken hydroxychloroquine despite risks, as AP News attempts to defame everybody. So when after one of Mike Pence's staffers was diagnosed with COVID-19, tested positive, so Trump started taking hydroxychloroquine and zinc. So a lot of good things have come out of the hydroxy. A lot of good things have come out. You'd be surprised at how many people are taking it. Okay? Which is great because it's a very old drug. It's very cheap. It's readily available. It's already used to do all the things that we've said it does. So yeah, for everybody who is trying to gaslight and debunk us, there you go. Once again, proven correct. What a surprise. Do you watch the Joe Rogan Experience? Now, Joe Rogan and I disagree on many, many things, especially things economic and political, because he has no idea what he's talking about. But when it comes to things like nutrition and fitness and psychedelia and martial arts, Joe knows what he's talking about. One of his most recent guests is Dr. Rhonda Patrick. Dr. Rhonda Patrick has got some interesting information to share with you, so watch the JRE number 1474 if you haven't yet. Here's a teaser.
Burning. But the question is like, you know, there's homeostatic processes in these cells and stuff, and so.
Anyway, she brought up an interesting fact about xylitol. Were you aware of xylitol? Well, xylitol is a type of sugar alcohol, and it's used to sweeten things like sugarless gum. Were you aware that as of 2015, clinical trials examining whether it can prevent cavities? Anyway, back to Dr. Rhonda Patrick. What happened with Dr. Rhonda Patrick is this. She went to the dentist, and the dentist said, hey, you've got 2 cavities, and they're both beyond the point of no return. The enamel was probably completely destroyed in those areas. Now, she being like me, a skeptic of practically everything, and a real scientist, she said, okay, well, don't fill them now. I'll call you back to set up an appointment to get them filled. In the meantime, I'm going to go home and do some research. So she went home and did some research, found out about xylitol, then found out she was pregnant, then canceled her cavity appointment. And then after she had the baby, she went to get the cavities filled, and guess what? The cavities were gone, as evidenced by the x-ray her dentist showed her. Now, I'm not an anti-dentite, but don't tell the ADA that I told you about xylitol, because if I mysteriously turned up having committed suicide, you'll know the ADA came over and took me out for telling you about xylitol. And it's available in all kinds of gum. We have gum in the cabinet called Orbit, which contains xylitol. So perhaps consider trying that out for all you people with horrendous dental work like me. Actually, it's not that bad. It's pretty bad, but it's not terrible. Anyway, please take a moment to press like and subscribe on YouTube. Thanks to all of our new subscribers. And let's move on. Now, we are on other social media here, such as on Twitter. So if you don't follow us there yet, or maybe you hate Twitter, I don't know. I don't blame you if you do. And I don't know how to get back to my homepage. There we go. Bird Box. And then there you go. There's smAsho Mash. We've got all kinds of interesting things like stuff about Neil Ferguson. We're also on other social media such as Facebook. Go over there, sign the petition to recall to Governor Tom Wolf, perhaps. We're also on Minds, the future of social media. There's Neil Ferguson. I like him better like that. What about you? We're also on Locals. It's smashomash.locals.com, Dave Rubin's new website. If you want to get the Neil Ferguson, who's cost the world trillions and trillions and trillions with his pandemic model software, he deserves at least a decade behind bars. Please leave a comment if you like Neil Ferguson better like that. We are also on Call to show you a white screen and then replace it with that and check and see if there are any comments. By the way, thanks everybody who tunes live. So last night we decided to watch the terrible nonsense movie Jack and Jill. And here's another clip from the film.
Has anybody seen this?
Nobody has seen this.
They have to be found and talked to.
They have to be. Has anybody seen this? They have to be found and talked to. This is one of the worst movies I've ever seen, hands down. Jack and Jill, so terrible. It will make you want to boycott every company represented in the movie. It's just one giant advertisement. The jokes, most of the jokes aren't even jokes. I mean, oh my gosh. Now, I fell asleep toward the end, and I'm going to have to watch the last 20 minutes of this monstrosity. Adam Sandler is Jack and Jill. What a dill. It's terrible. Good God. One of the worst movies I've ever seen. And by the way, guess what the budget is? $79 million. It cost only $10 million than Terminator 2 Judgment Day. It looks like it cost about $5. Here's what I think about it.
This right here is how your life gets ruined. When you have a person like this, Adam Sandler, starring as his own twin sister in Jack and Jill. Only in a situation like this can you have something like this. A poor 6 or 7 year old child, without any respect to Katie Holmes and having her head almost entirely not visible. But this child's expression alone expresses the movie by this man all by itself. What have I done with my life? I am 6 or 7 years old, and my parents have already destroyed it. Thank you, Adam Sandler. Read Jack and Jill.
So if you'd like to see your soul cast into an ever deepening and darkening abyss of doom and destruction and dog turd rain, watch Jack and Jill. And if you want to see brilliant insight and even some nature photos like this, follow me on Instagram. There's all kinds of exclusive content on all the social medias. And let's get back to some data. Looking at the jet stream. And we see a powerful low pressure system there just south of Lake Michigan. Heavy counterclockwise rotation indicates low pressure systems in the northern hemisphere. We see extreme meridional jet stream flow. We see a doubled up and tripled up jet stream on both hemispheres. Here are the eastern world's jets. Powerful low off the east coast of India as well. Over there in the Bay of Bengal. Look at the tripled up jet stream in the southern hemisphere. It looks like it's going to make for cold days in southern Australia. Now let's move on to look at water vapor maps for Europe and Africa. There are those. Water vapor maps for the Far East and Oceania. Looking at water vapor, folks. Next, looking at lightning maps at lightningmaps.org, my favorite site when I hear thunder. You can even forecast when thunder will roll in. So hey, Rockingham, North Carolina, there's thunder rolling in there. Some mild lightning activity happen in that area. And next we'll look at the U.S. Doppler radar map. And we may have to start doing more meteorology videos depending on how stuff works out in terms of hurricane season. It's entirely possible that we'll have to make another playlist about that. If you haven't checked out the playlists on YouTube yet, there are over 60 cosmology segments. And we're putting every daily space weather video as well as other playlists. So check out our older content if you haven't. Please leave a comment. Share with your friends. Share with your foes. Share with your neutrals. And it looks like the Bahamas are getting struck. Here's what's going on in the cloud layer. This is the NASA GOES Interactive Weather Satellite Shortwave Radiation map, which shows you what clouds are doing at nighttime when it's too dark to see them with the visible. Here's the U.S. water vapor map. So there are the clouds. And there's the water vapor. What's the point? Well, the water vapor map shows us water that's not condensed onto clouds, which would be invisible to the naked eye, similar to the way carbon dioxide is visible to Greta Thunberg's. And let's check out this low basically over the center of Illinois, or as I like to call it, Illinois, which contains one of my least favorite cities, Chicago. Oh, did I say that? Chicago. Please leave a comment if you prefer Chicago or Detroit. Check it out. That's got some power, but it's going to be weakened by all this dry air, which is more massive, and it's going to slow down the rotation, which is probably a good thing, as it would develop into heavy, heavy storms if it wasn't for that surrounded dry air there. Please consider becoming a patron. We've got links below the videos to all of our social media as well as crowdfunding sites. We need a lot more funding to accomplish our goals in 2020. We haven't even begun to do what we're going to be doing this year yet, as it's just getting started. And we really do need your support, folks. Thanks to our patrons for being assistant and associate producers. We are also on Subscribestar and on PayPal. And thanks to everybody who's ever donated, whether it was one time or recurring. We appreciate your continued support. We appreciate your Smash team also. Please, again, share in your social media. We need to get the content out into people's brains so that we can get people to understand the real physics instead of the nonsense, non-science, and all the other BS that's all over the internet about the way these things really work. Thanks for flying American Smashways. Please keep your head and arms inside of the Smash plane at all times. And stay tuned for 3 bonus features. First, the intensity gram of the local yellow dwarf, to show you 0 sunspots. Do you see any dark ombre? I certainly don't. No zoom in required there. Next, we'll look at the colorized magnetogram. A new active region forming here around the equator, which is, by the way, cycle 24 activity. And it's a perfect allegory of how we are already in cycle 25. Look at this big plage and this big plage, which are both cycle 25. And look at this tiny little active region here, which is cycle 24. Since the cycle began exactly when I said it would last year, you could gladly congratulate me in the comments below, citing the fact that cycle 24 ended around the end of August, beginning of September, when cycle 25 began. Cheers! And let's look at one more view here. How about the 131 angstroms? One of my personal favorites. Like 94 angstroms, this one takes 10 images per minute instead of only 2 like all the rest of the wavelengths. So it's great for studying filaments and solar flares and sunspots and plages and all that sort of good stuff. Thanks again for tuning in, everybody, whether you viewed live or you viewed Memorex. Remember, stare at the sun, attempt to understand the physics, don't drink, and if you do, don't drive. And since it'll never be now again, welcome to the Neo-Renaissance, folks. Head to smashomash.com/forum and let us know what you're thinking about. As we like to host stuff on our forum, considering the way social media behaves. Anyway, stare at the sun, don't drink. If you do, don't drive. It'll never be now again. May the solar wind be at your back, and may the covidiocy be gone from existence.